Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and we'll soon be all over. Just one more painful week to go, and then the horror of a season will be over, and hopefully we can reset, recharge, recalibrate all the words, and maybe, just maybe, we can get back to winning footy. But before we can do that, we need to talk about Friday night, and to do just that, I'm joined by my co-host, one of Demonland's head writers, George on the Outer. Good evening, George. How are you going?
Good evening, Andy, and good evening to hopefully there's some listeners out there this week. I'm glad to be back again this week. I thought I might finish up doing a Cade Chandler, in for 1 week and then out for the season the next. But here I am back again, so it'll be good to talk about what we saw in the game, or what we did see in the game.
You made a reference to Cade Chandler. Is there something I should know? Is he out for the season? Is he injured?
Yeah, he's got a broken finger.
Oh, my goodness.
On the latest injury report out today, it's got season. So that's it for him.
Maybe we needed a Super Mercado in here to give us the statistics on players who have played their first game, been injured, and then perhaps we might have to wait to see whether we ever see him ever again.
Yeah. I'm starting to worry about Super Mercado as well. He didn't even attend the game, according to the Demon blog this week. So you better be really careful, because he's seated row MM in the top deck of the Ponsford stand might be taken from him next year, with overwhelming Demon supporters trying to get into it.
Did you see the picture of that lone figure sitting there at 3/4 time? He looked like he was asleep.
Yeah, there was no reaction on the screen from him, which isn't surprising, because there wasn't much reaction from anybody in the crowd, quite frankly. So it was just one of the rest of us.
Well, it was Sydney's. It was their biggest win for the season. Not surprisingly against us, but when you have 17th playing 15th, I don't know. You probably don't expect such a big gulf, and well, there it is, a huge gulf. And George, you weren't happy with the choices made at the selection table on Thursday night, having read your report on Demonland.
It was interesting, and reflecting on that. I mean, you look at the players who were selected. You're going into the game with, as was advertised quite broadly, the shortest team for years and years, and virtually a non-existent forward line, effectively. But then, you reflect on what we do have available at Casey, and the barrel is very, very right at the very bottom of the barrel. I think Declan Keelty was the only effective available forward, so it's not surprising. And then if you really want to be cynical, the players who were either dropped, like Hunt and Baker, and Bruce wasn't selected after 75 hitouts the previous week, you might say that Casey winning against Frankston this week was of more value than Melbourne winning against Sydney, because at least the Casey win this week enabled them to have a chance of playing finals. They only fell in by one goal in what sounded like an absolutely enthralling game of down at the Frankston Oval, because Casey was declared unplayable, the ground itself, and then they had a scoreline of 4-14 to 4-8. So it would have been a fantastic game of AFL football to watch.
Yes,
you could argue that those players were better served down at Casey than actually playing against Sydney.
Well, we wouldn't be doing the T word, would we?
No. I don't think we do. I don't think it's possible to do the T word. We're just not that good.
Yeah, that's true. You mentioned Declan Keelty. You'd think that the writing's on the wall for him. We had injuries to Petty and Omac, who had been playing as well. Omac had a week at down forward. Petty had a couple of weeks down forward. Obviously, T-Mac and Weed have been injured for a while. Declan Keelty has played up forward, definitely trained to play as a forward this year, got 2 chances. But if he couldn't get into the team, And I know you said that maybe they were focusing on Casey, but if he can't get into the team when there's absolutely no tall forwards available, and he is a guy who can play that position, you would think he might, the writing on the wall might be there for him. He might get delisted because he wasn't considered as a forward option for this match.
Yeah, that's unfortunately that's the nature of AFL football. It's pretty brutal. People don't. It's not a long-term career for people, and if you can't get those opportunities, or you get a bad run of injuries in your career, then you are shunted out of it very quickly. So that's unfortunate. But Kilty won't be the first one. There's a lot of players on the list who I think are in very similar positions. Even if they are injured at the moment, they're just not going to get a run in any case. So, like I said, that's the nature of the business. These are names that we'll forget about pretty quickly, unfortunately, and we'll move on to the next group of young people coming in.
Yeah, and I think we might perhaps next week might discuss in a little bit more detail. Have a look at the list and see if we can sort of identify who's going to be there, who's not going to be there, and we might leave that for next week. This week though, we had just talking about selections. Were you aware prior to that we had those injuries? That Omac was injured. Was he another mystery injury of the week? Before selection.
He was omitted from the injury list last week, but also if you look at this week's injury list, both Omac and Petty are still missing. That's in addition to the 17 who are on the list. I think we're a little bit beaten around the head too much with this injury list of ours. We know it's not quite the truth, and there's further examples of that again this week, it would seem. But there you go, last round of the game, who cares? Last round of the year, who cares? Almost. Yeah. So it'll be. And Casey aren't playing this week. They've got a bye, so it will be interesting who actually is available and who is selected this week.
I'll just mention, if you would like to join us tonight on the program to discuss any of the topics that we talk about, give us a call, 039016 3666. That's 039016 3666, or you can Skype us at Demonland31. If you're listening to the show live, jump in the chat room. You can ask us some questions. You can post comments. The chat room's at demonland.com/podcast. If you're listening to this at your leisure via SoundCloud on demonland.com or via an Apple or Android podcasting app, be sure to subscribe and you can receive updates when a new show drops. Don't forget to leave us a favourable review. It does help more people find us. We're also on Spotify, so you can get the show that way too. Go to demonland.com to find the links to your preferred method of listening. You can also follow us on social media at facebook.com/Demonland31, on Twitter at Demonland, on Instagram at Demonland31. Go to YouTube and search for Demonland Podcast, and you can listen to some of the interviews that we've conducted over the years with current and past players and coaches. If you just love talking about the D's 24/7 all year round, why not join up to Demonland.com, chat with other D's fans about this great club. All right, we'll get back into it, George. We mentioned the injuries, and that's definitely been a part of it. It's had an impact on our performances. We don't have the best cattle available for us, but even with all those injuries, there's something that's stinking very badly at this club at the moment.
Yeah, it's really difficult, I can imagine, and the extent of the injuries and the effects that those injuries have on confidence, particularly for young players. It's nice to get a win under your belt, even if it's only every now and again. People, it's been pointed out this week about people arguing with each other on the field. I don't think that's such a bad thing, but it doesn't look good. And, a lot of this game is all about confidence, and the difference between the top and the bottom side isn't all that great if the truth be known. And when you've got such extensive injuries that we have, it really makes it hard, not just missing quality players from being in the side, but the replacements for those quality players are just not as good. And, when you can trust a quality player to deliver when you need him to deliver, the not so quality player simply isn't able to do it, and so you almost get a double effect. No positives and increased negatives, and that's exactly what we've seen. The turnovers have increased dramatically this year, and the lack of scoring up the forward line has reduced dramatically from these injuries lists. It was interesting, if we're talking about injuries list, I just did a quick run through this week's injuries for many other clubs. And if you want an insight into perhaps who's going to do well in the finals, for example, Brisbane have got in their injury list, I think 4 players at the moment, and three players on their injury list. And of those 3 players, one's a rookie who hasn't played a game, and one's a first-year player who hasn't played a game. And I think the third one's going to be back within 2 weeks. Even Geelong have only got 7 injuries on their list at the moment. 3 of them are on test this week, and 4 others are going to be back within 1 to 2 weeks. So in other words, they could have 1 player not available at the end of this round. Richmond, 5 players injured, 2 are on tests and 1 back. So again, at the end of the home and aways, Richmond might only have 2 or 3 players on the injury list. And it's not surprising. West Coast is similar. 7 players injured, 1 on a test this week, 3 available within the next week or 2. So they'll only have 4 players on their injury list at the end of the season. It's not surprising that all of these teams are the ones that are sitting at the top of the ladder.
You'd have to say that if any of them had been as hit as we have, and it's been all year with us. We've been fortunate that our core midfield has been there, and they've had their issues as well. But any team you take any of those top 4, 5, 6 teams and give them 17 injuries now and throughout the year, they're going to struggle, just like we have this year. And I know we've got other issues as well, but it doesn't help. That's the starting point. I'm not 100% convinced if we go into the season with a full team. I've got some worries about the way we play, even with a full list, but we would certainly finish a lot higher than our position at the moment. And we'll see next year. I might be proven wrong.
Yeah, it's interesting. There is some commentary on Demon Land from some posters that our game style wasn't able to be implemented because these players that they were trying to drill early in the season simply weren't out there on the park at all. They were still stuck in the medical rooms. And in a game like AFL with 18 players on the field, you've really got to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing and where they've got to go and how they've got to play. And if, as the case was in January, you've got 12 players still in the medical room, well, you're not going to be able to drill that into the people, regardless of the injury situation. But I see Binman in the chat rooms said at the risk of being a broken record, our injuries have been compounded by our pre-season woes. We've never been fit. And I think that's true. And the way we play is unfortunately at the moment what we're seeing is not just reflective of those injuries, but the lack of input that we've been able to put into the players who are uninjured.
Yeah, which makes it all the more important if we go into the season with a full list and we have a pretty much full pre-season with the majority of our players. If we do find ourselves mid-year in a similar position, heads are going to roll, but it's too early to make that call. We have to wait to see what actually happens. We had our shortest team on the park. The Facebook page, Useless AFL Stats, has said Melbourne have selected one of the shortest sides ever to contest an AFL game in recent times. They have named their 3 shortest players in Charlie Spargo, Jay Kennedy Harris, and newcomer Kate Chandler, all 173 centimetres. It's believed to be the first time the club has ever named its 3 shortest players there. The average height of the Melbourne team is just 184.8 centimetres.
Yeah, it's and the pity is you can't compare it in the past, because if you go back and look at the ruckman in the 1960s, they were probably 182 centimetres or something
Yes,
like
that's
that.
true.
So it'd be interesting to compare how short we are compared to, let's say, 10 years ago. But yeah, the players are so tall these days. It's not a valid comparison to go too far back. But at the end of the day, I remember looking down the ground at one stage and seeing Charlie Spargo standing at centre half back, and you just shake your head and you go, "This is not going to end very prettily," and I doubt that it did.
No.
So
Last week we talked about the vision from on the couch, showing all the demons trying to contest for the ball. In that case, we didn't win the ball, and the opposition had a lineup of players on the outside ready to share the ball all the way to goal. And we've seen this happen week in, week out this year. That if we don't get the ball, if we do get the ball, we usually flick it out to a player under pressure. He's surrounded by opposition, and we're becoming very predictable. I think you mentioned it, maybe it was in your report, that you said we've been worked out by every coach in the league, and it's really hard to watch.
yeah, that's certainly the case, and it's again tied up with this lack of training that we got into the players early in the season. If you're trying to implement a game plan, and the half the team's missing or a third of the team's missing, then you really just got to run with what you've got, and I suspect that's what we've done. While we've adopted this hard in and under sort of approach, as I've said, or other coaches have worked this out, that you've just got to sweat on the Melbourne players. If they get the ball, they'll just pass it out to where we're already sitting and waiting for them. If they don't get it, there's no Melbourne players on the outside, and we'll just run the ball freely up to the other end of the ground. So we really need at least the opportunity, providing all these players do become available in pre-season, to be able to run some new game plans and some new approaches. It just isn't working, as we've seen in the games against Richmond and Collingwood and St Kilda and now Sydney. It's just been a repeat of the same fundamental problems around that. So yeah, we've just got to suck it up, as they say, and hopefully it'll be drilled a little bit better for next year.
It's not just on the ground that we contest against each other.
Yeah.
I see us all the time, just time and time again. Demons player flying against each other in the air, and then the ball comes out the back. And this week there were Swans players sometimes waiting. Ball would come over the back, and he just runs into goal, or they kick it to a guy who's by himself.
Yeah, that's exactly another one of the symptoms. That's attack at all costs, but the problem is that particularly as happened in this week's game as well, you get that bit of rain and the ball's a bit more slippery. Not everybody needs to be up, because simply people aren't going to mark the ball, and it is going to come out the back. And it's interesting to watch players like Jordan Lewis in these situations. They're the ones who actually stay down and sit out the back. That's the what you talk about, experience and leadership and things like that. That's epitomised in a player like that, as opposed to three people trying to fly in the air against each other to try and mark something that they're not going to mark in the first place, particularly when one or two of them is trying to punch it away from their own teammates.
You mentioned the slippery conditions. I think we've got no idea how to play the conditions at time. We saw it against Richmond a couple of weeks ago. We, constantly attempt to pick up the ball off the ground instead of just booting it forward. I watched Richmond play the Eagles the other day, and there was a lot of kicking it off the ground just to get it forward. But instead we choose to make a sloppy handball, just instead of booting it out of defence, away from the congestion of the opposition players. We played into Sydney's hands, and they were, sort of able to continually apply pressure, and they force these turnovers.
Yeah, it's very frustrating watching it as a supporter. The crowd of people around me. I remember at one stage, I can't remember who the player was. It was either Brayshaw or Wagner. Had a reasonably good break on the Sydney player behind him heading up the wing, but the ball was on the ground, and he tried to pick it up instead of just booting it forward. At that time in the wet conditions, just boot it forward, get it forward, keep pushing it forward. And as soon as he tried to pick it up, of course, he sweated on and he's tackled and it's brought to the ground and the ball goes nowhere. It's really frustrating, for the supporters. Like I said, all the people around me before it even happened were just saying, kick it off the ground, kick it off the ground. And he didn't do it. And that's what happened, unfortunately, again and again.
And if you watched, I watched the Richmond West Coast game, and that was probably had the worst conditions, but that's what Richmond do every time, and they did it against us as well. Kick it off the ground, get it forward, keep it moving forward, and it seemed to work for them. But I don't know, maybe that's the team rule, pick it up off the ground.
Maybe it is, mate. Isn't there a rule in under 10s that you're not allowed to pick it up off? You've got to pick it up off the ground before in the under 10 grade, but you don't. You must pick the ball up. It's only when you play under 12s, I think, that you're allowed to kick it off the ground. So maybe some of our players haven't progressed all that much.
I thought and this might be just a symptom of it being the end of the year, and I think the players want it to be over as much as us supporters. But I thought we had a lot of players that genuinely looked disinterested. They weren't prepared to chase and be accountable, and I think we just lack an effective game plan. We lack pace, skill, effort, sometimes fitness, as we've talked about, effective tackling, and I think most of all, we lack pride. I know it's the end of the year, but I just want them. I don't know. I just want them to show a bit of pride, and I think that was evident in most of our senior players, with the exception of Max, who I think all year has busted a gut.
Yeah, it's not just disappointing for those players. You can imagine, players like, I'll use Nathan Jones as an example. He's, played in every game, busted his gut over a long career. He's got very little success, and he's surrounded by others who, really shouldn't be there, I suppose, by any measure, and they're incapable or don't want to put in the same sort of effort that he does, and the supporters see it as well. So it's very difficult to watch when you compare what, say, North Melbourne supporters who 2 weeks ago watched a game where their team scored 14 points, or you watched Essendon 2 weeks ago who had 21 goals kicked against them in succession, and then both of those sides come out and really show something. I think there's a great opportunity this week for the Melbourne players, to actually show something in appreciation of their supporters. We can only wait and see, and we can only hope about that, but it is possible.
We'll talk about next week, surely, but I'm not looking forward to it, especially not looking forward to one player in particular who might just give us a bit of a drubbing. Tackles are a good measure of work rate. We're fifth last in tackles in the comp. Last year we were third best. We've dropped away by nearly 10 tackles a game this year.
It is symptomatic of the whole problem. But I think what's more telling is the lack of tackling effort around the ground. I don't know, this is when you need some of the statisticians from our site to look into it. The tackling around the ground has really dropped off considerably. The forward line, there's virtually no pressure brought on the opposition defenders when they're getting the ball. We can all applaud, for example, Jake Melcham this week kicking 3 goals, but in fact he had no tackles in the whole game. Sometimes that might be symptomatic of they're actually carrying injuries and they're unable to get to contests as much as they would like to. But once again, it doesn't reflect well on the side when there's no pressure and the ball just, as you've said before, just pings from one end of the ground to the other, or out of the congestion, and there's no pressure from a Melbourne player, and it goes straight up the other end, and the score results. It's really dispiriting for both the players who are putting in and for the supporters watching it on the outside.
Yeah, that's what we really need to fix up, that the small forward brigade in our team. Now, Melksham, I can excuse a little bit. He had that. It definitely had an interrupted pre-season. He was in the rehab group most of the time. He's had the injury mid-year. He's come back now. I get that you said that he had no tackles and all that, but he has kicked 3 goals, 5, and all right, the inaccuracy as well has killed us. If he boots 6, 7, 8, it puts our scoreline a little bit closer. But our small forwards, Nibbler, Wagner, well, you had a first gamer in Chandler. I think we've got to fix up the small forward brigade, and I guess we've got to draft that because we're not going to be able to trade that in. And we've got a call coming in. I think we've got Bin Man calling us. I'll pick that up. Good evening, Bin Man. You're on the air.
Good evening, fellas. How are you going?
Not too bad. We probably need you here. We need a bit of positivity into our discussion tonight.
Well, a couple of positive things. I've really appreciated George on the Outers analysis for last week and this week. Very measured and an excellent fill-in. Positive. Look, can I the negative first?
Oh no, you can. Yeah, I love negative. So please,
feed them easily.
Feed into my MFC SS, please.
I mean, it was a very dispiriting game, and my negative was as I think I told a few weeks ago, I'm on the top of my ladder in a tipping contest, and this tipping contest has been going for 20 years. I won it once in its inaugural season, or maybe its second season. It's gone from a small comp to a very big comp in the interim. Not close. But I'm choosing Melbourne, and I tipped them early in the week on the off chance that I somehow forgot, which would be the case. And I went with the bookies odds for $1.75 or $1.80. And then I saw the changes, and I thought, that's ridiculous. 5 changes. And just as George from the Outer had in his report, not just the changes, who they brought in. I thought, well, that's ridiculous. But stuck fat with the D's, and of course, it just started a horrible run of tipping for me for the weekend. So that's the negative. Negative is...
Can I ask you, are you one of those people that tip Melbourne every week, or you don't do that?
Well, the reason I've never got close to winning it is, yes, that's generally the case. The reason that I'm close to winning it, well, I've probably torpedoed my chances this year, is that was the case early on, but fortunately it was the case for everyone else as well. So we were favourites in the first 6 or 7 games. We were favourites, so I tipped them in those games.
Yeah.
If I'd gone right from the beginning and never tipped Melbourne, I'd be ahead by 10 I think.
All right, what's your next negative?
My next negative is the Chandler was it was perplexing that he brought in, and you spoke last week, I think, about it was good that they didn't bring Jordan in, and he was probably more deserving of it, going on reports from Casey, and then Chandler's sort of getting selected, I thought was great for him, but it got watered down somewhat by the next day they announced 4 more changes. And the poor, what a start for his career. I mean, that's exactly what you both said last week about the risk for Jordan, starting off on a bad note. So I just felt for the young fella, and he looks young as well. So that was negative number 2. And the third negative was I'm a big fan of Jones, but some of his body language on Friday night, I was really disappointed on. There was one play where someone should have manned up on the mark, and he was quite demonstrative about that. Instead of running hard around to get onto the mark, they were kicking towards goal, maybe about from 50-metre mark. The mark was about 45. Instead of running around hard once it was clear that someone wasn't going to be on the mark, he just sort of came to the side after clearly being annoyed at a teammate for not coming up on the mark, and didn't man the mark properly. And I thought, that's just not what you want from your most senior player, and I get that he's had he's seen a lot of disappointment. But I was really disappointed in that.
That wasn't the only incident where a player wasn't happy with another player. There was the incident with Bailey Fritsch and Clayton Oliver. Bailey Fritsch ignored a handball out to Clayton, but was able to still find someone, and he hit up Neil Bullen, who can't remember whether he kicked a goal or not with the kick, but Clayton Oliver wasn't happy. He missed, but anyway, he did find someone in a good position for a set shot. Whereas had he handballed it out to Oliver, who knows what would have happened. It's not a good look. What are your thoughts on that, big man?
Look, I really concur with what George on the ad was saying before. Is to be honest, it's overplayed a bit, this game. Demonland is a funny lens on the game, and I sort of stayed off it to an extent during the week because really the bottom's fallen out. When those 5 players, I was really annoyed at myself, to be honest, for not changing my tip, and that was my big, I hadn't done that. I was trying to be objective, but you bring 5 players in at any time, even if you're travelling well, that's a lot to change in a mix. But 5 really uninspiring changes. That's doubling down on So it was really you could see Swans were up and about. The season can't come at the end of the season can't come quick enough for us, and so that's the way we played and the lack of sort of spirit is really it's pretty understandable, to be honest. I mean, if you think about it, they've had all of those injuries. They're clearly not fit. They're bringing in players like Spargo who did not deserve a call-up. They've dropped Hunt, and that's a really curious one because he hasn't been great, but surely he's been better than Spargo.
Also, I'll just on that because I had that in my notes with Hunt. He's our second leading goal kicker with 20 goals this year. He was dropped last week playing in the back line. Perhaps they could have moved him forward. I guess they must have been punishing him for his game last week, but and admittedly he didn't have a great game the week before, but he is our leading goal scorer in a team that's struggling to score goals.
Well, I put on the chat room, I actually think George's point about Casey is actually not that unreasonable. Is that, it seems a bit absurd to prioritise a win at VFL level over AFL level, but it wouldn't shock me if that was a factor in thinking, well, get some players with some experience in finals, get them another 2-3 weeks of playing. I think that's not an unreasonable position, to be honest. And, I'm not suggesting tanking, but, we want pick number 2. So I don't think, I wonder whether that was a factor, but without that, it's a bit hard to understand how he could possibly brought in. I've been really disappointed in Spargo because he didn't perform, did he? Spargo didn't take his opportunity. He was gifted one, and he didn't take it, nor did Chandler, it has to be said. And Dunkley, I thought, he looks slow as well. So, was not really impressive by any of those young fellas.
Sydney they're the youngest team on average in the comp, and they'd lost their last 6 games, yet they sort of played with spirit. They've got some injuries, not as many as us, but they got some very key players injured off their list. But they played with a bit of spirit and a bit of heart and made us look like witches' hats.
Yeah, but as I said, we've sort of the psychology of the game is set up for that. We've had an awful season, just as bad a season as you can imagine having, and that's got to affect the players.
Yeah.
I think we've done well not to have dropped our bundles before, as noted. The previous week Essendon got thrashed by 100. Gave up 23 goals in a row or 21 goals in a row. Imagine Demonland would have just stopped functioning if they'd done that.
Mind you, there's still a week to go with Ben Brown after kicking 10. So,
well, surely Oscar comes back and mans him up. So,
we don't know whether Oscar's injured or not, though.
Yes.
Ben Man. Do you have anything else?
So positive.
Yes, positive. Let's hear some positives, please.
That's enough of the negative. So I wasn't shocked that we got thumped. It was very dispiriting. I really. It was awful. There's no two ways about it. But the positive for me, and the sort of the strange one, there were two positives. One for me, the ongoing improved form of Fritsch. I thought that decision to kick to Neil Bullen was brilliant. It was a great kick, notwithstanding the vitriol that he got. I didn't see that at the time, but he's looking the goods, and he's so much better forward, as everyone's been saying on Demonland for all year. But the other big positive for me was Lever. I thought, you mentioned before who stood up. I actually thought Maxi didn't have a great game. And probably his least effective game all season, but I was super impressed by Lever's attitude, his effort. He made some mistakes, but I thought he was fantastic, really fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was having a look at some stats before the show. I think he had 11 1-percenters. Doesn't sort of a stat that doesn't really get talked about. I remember when we were in juniors, it was all the coach would talk about. But it's
they're Oscar-like numbers.
Yes.
Andy, I thought it was interesting with the Fritsch Oliver situation as highlighted on the media, and of course everybody picks it up and runs with it. There's Nick Rewalt making a commentary about not giving the ball to the right person or complaining to your teammates about not giving it to it. And I can remember many, many games where Rewalt the arms were flapping around when he's been up and nobody's been kicking the ball to him either. So making a complaint like that about someone else doing the same thing, I think it was a bit rich.
Yeah, the three people talking about it were all forwards, I believe,
yeah.
and then blaming it on midfielders or just wanting to get a kick. So yeah. Any more positives, Bin Man?
Look, I mean, I think the other, it's sort of a bit of a strange situation with the game plan. I mean, they've definitely tried to play a different style since the bye. There's no question, and it's quite strange on Demonland as a whole how that doesn't seem to be recognised. They're playing the chip and hold, much different to it's so noticeable. The issue is that we don't really have the confidence to hit those targets or the players necessarily with those skills. But for me, that's a positive that Goodwin. I mean, like you can read it two ways. Freo today that just sacked their coach. Their CEO's quit, which he could barely not quit given he he got live in, I think. The club is in total crisis. They've got twice as many members as us, but that club is in total meltdown. And so, the decisions around moving on McCartney and the others, I think in getting a new, I think that's a positive in that we're handling it without going into crisis mode. 5 years ago, this sort of season would have destroyed Melbourne. So for me, that's a positive. It may not seem like that to others, I guess, but I think that, our board would have disintegrated even 5 years ago if this season happened.
Well, watch this space next year, because if we're in a similar position next year, then it's going to be full crisis mode from the board to the coaching staff to everywhere. So we'll see what happens next year. Hopefully we can turn around, but if we don't, then we're going to be the ones in crisis mode, and the torch is going to be on us from day dot next year.
And that's fair enough, but we need a good crack at pre-season and injuries. That's just it.
I'm hoping that that's all it is, and that can enough to turn it around. Maybe a bit of tweaking of the game plan, perhaps some quality assistance around the place, and some good trading and drafting. So yeah, there'll be an interesting off season for us for sure.
And one more positive is that over the last 10 years, and since I've started posting on Demonland, which was, I looked at my posting history the other day, I think it's 9 years now, which seems a pretty crazy length of time, is that this was always the best time of year for coming into the sort of, what could happen in the next season, who could we draft in, the possibilities were endless. So it's sort of, I'm approaching this off-season with some positivity about who we might get in, the magic Burgess will install on a club. So I think, trying my best to get something out of the wreckage.
Yeah, well, this time of the year is always, meaning the trade and draft is always been big on Demon Land. So we expect a big couple of months coming up for us, and I think we'll we're going to obviously do a show next week after the game, and then we'll be back in the trade week and the draft week as well. So always a big off season for Demon Land. Big man, I still have two more negatives, just to bring it back. First one, Max had 52 hitouts, and Sydney only had 19 in total. Yet for most of the game, they led the clearance count. I think at the end it wasn't too bad; it was pretty even. But to have such a lopsided hitouts and then to be sort of even at the clearances, it's not good enough.
Well, I think there's been, again on Demon Land, it's sort of it's an interesting lens, but there's been a lot of talk about our game plan. But I think, to be honest, our biggest problem this year in terms of our game plan is the opposition have just gone to town on Max Gawn, and we haven't responded. We haven't. I mean, sometimes it's like you think he's hit it straight down their throat and thought, Maxie, what's going on? That's clearly not his fault. That's a setup issue. And other teams have done their homework on us, and we haven't responded. So personally, I think that's been our biggest tactical and strategic sort of failing is the other teams have just gone to school on us and have hurt us, actually.
So what's wrong there? We've got a very talented midfield. We haven't had injuries in that area. Obviously, a lot of those boys were those guys that missed a lot of the pre-season. So there might be that fitness issue with them. But they're all very quality players, yet we're not getting enough out of them. Besides this game, we were winning a lot in most of the games this year. We've won clearances, but haven't been able to win games. And that connection with the forward line as well. So that's a worry. We've got to change something up there.
Well, I think probably George is probably better suited for that question about what's gone wrong. But for me, it seems that's where there's been a problem with the setup. I mean, I forget who the clearance coach is, but that's a real issue.
And George,
I think the two things are probably tied in together. Firstly, with Max, when you've got such a really dominant ruckman as he is, he's actually getting the ball probably further out than what he's been used to, say, against someone like Grundy. And when we talked about before, everybody going in and nobody on the out, if Max is actually knocking the ball further out, it is going straight to the opposition. So I think that was a factor with the Sydney game. But the other thing that we, once again, talking about injuries, the outside players that we were hoping, I suppose, this season to be out and being the links once we've got those clearances would have been the Vandenbergs, Hunt, if he was moving up to the wing. Colin Jasny was supposed to be in that sort of role, and we've had, Hunt's been forced to play forward and back. We've actually had no one on the wings or coming off the halfback flanks to be able to take advantage of when we actually have got the clearances. So, it sounds like a broken record again and again and again, but all these things seem to be interrelated, unfortunately.
Yeah,
and I think that's a critical issue, that the interrelatedness. You can't pull. Like, I know I've banged on about the impact of. There's two factors: the preseason and the injuries together. You can't split them. They're together. Together, they're another issue in of themselves. Like, Richmond had a great preseason, were hurt early on and went down still early on, but they got the miles in the legs. We never got the miles in the legs, and we've got not just injuries, but rolling injuries right through the season. And I saw Paul Chandler's, as I think was mentioned earlier, he's out for the season already, one game and he's gone. But that's been the pattern of the whole season. We've just not got the legs. So that flows right through everything, through the game plan, the setup, the confidence, the whole way of playing. And one concern I have is that, I think there's been talk about our game plan, but you can't really assess our game plan unless it's at full fitness. Like Richmond, our game plan is the most analogous game plan in the league is Richmond's to ours. They're better. They've got better players, and their system. That's what gets talked about a lot, is how well everyone knows their system. But that's our game plan that we're trying to replicate. And so, I hate for them to throw the baby out with the bathwater and suddenly, we don't have the cattle to play another game plan. That's our game plan. We've recruited for it. So in a way, let's hope that it's the right one.
The other story of this year has been inside 50 count. And, I struggle to find how does a team win the inside 50 count 55-45, yet still lose by 53 points. It's bizarre. And I think the only positive I can take from that is that we are getting the ball into the inside 50s. If we weren't even getting it into the forward line at all, that'd be a real worry and panic stations. But it's not good that we're winning, have 10 more inside 50s and lose by 53.
Yeah, that's been the case the whole season, hasn't it, Andy? This was just a repeat of the same. But when you do look at who we've had in the forward line, particularly in this latter half of the season, the ball goes in there and there's Bailey Fritsch all on his own, or Melksham again all on his own. And this week, with Rampy and Lloyd just sweating on them all the time because they knew they didn't have to worry about anybody else. Just concentrate on those one or two players. The pity, I think, is that while the ball's going in there, the same has happened this week, there were no midfielders actually scored. We're not getting the assistance from the midfield up coming forward as well. So we've got a decimated forward line. But when you watch all the opposition that we've had this year, their midfielders contributed on the scoreboard as well, and our guys simply haven't. There's a secondary problem going on there. Again, that comes down to game plan and fitness and training for these things. But it's not surprising when we're getting the ball in there, okay, it just comes straight out again. And then there's a counter is the ball goes up the other end and scored easily. So you don't get the goal in the first place and one goes up the other end. It's almost like a 2-goal play in some cases.
That's exactly right. And I think the other factor is there's been a lot of, I think it makes sense there's been a lot of emphasis on the form woes of Tom McDonald and the struggles of Wiedemann, and both have had disappointing years, and I think both have been, we know both, at least Wiedemann's been carrying an injury. I suspect Tom McDonald has been hampered as well. But really, I think as big a factor, if not more, is our lack of harassing small forwards. And also mediums without Melksham, but in particular small forwards. And that's why I'm really disappointed with Spargo's year, because he is exactly the player. That's what he was recruited for, I presume. If you compare, Richmond's side, they've got 2, 3, 4 players playing that role. West Coast have got 2 or 3 quality players playing that role. And not only do we have no one up our end playing that role, we struggle with Jets out up the other end. And it's really been not the tall forwards of the opposition that have hurt us. It's been the medium and smalls that have killed us. At both ends of the ground, we've been cut up. As soon as the ball hits the ground, in our defensive 50 or our forward 50, we've been destroyed. And as George points out, then it just, in our forward 50, it pings up the other end and it's a 2-goal turnaround.
Absolutely spot on. B-Man, do you want to stick around? You're welcome to do so.
I'll keep on the phone. But boot me off when
No. You can stick around. I like hearing your insights, and we need to balance out my negativity with some positives. Friday night's game was a thank you to the members. And leave it to the Melbourne Football Club to save their best for the member appreciation round. Our membership count's going to suffer next year. I don't think that's going to be a surprise to anyone. There was a poll on Demonland this week. We only put it up a couple of days ago. There's been 187 members of Demonland have voted. 70% said yes, they'll buy a membership. 14% have said no, And I think that's just a few people just sort of protesting in a poll. But they'll probably buy their memberships, and 16% were undecided. I assume the two of you will be buying your memberships. So I'll be buying mine. But it is worrying for the club next year. There's a lot of angry people on social media and the like that will vote with their feet next year, which will only hurt the club, I guess, in the end.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting points to come out of that conversation on Demonland for a start, is that a good number of the people there recognise that not buying a membership's actually going to damage the club, which is, we're all heavily invested emotionally
Yes.
in the club. We can't get away from it. There's nothing we can do about it. So a lot of people are the same as us. You'll be there come hell or high water. Surprisingly, I think the statistics aren't all that unsurprising. If 14% have decided that they're not going to buy a membership, well, that's probably going to mean something in the order of 5,000 to 7,000 people, I suppose. And that's exactly what I would expect to be the drop-off in the numbers for next year. I think St Kilda this year had a drop-off of 10% from theirs after their appalling year last year. It's not surprising, and particularly given we had a good increase in our membership as a result of the end of last year. Expectations were high, so to see a drop-off is not unexpected whatsoever. So I think we've got a group of hardcore supporters there, which is great. They do recognise that supporting the club is what's needed to be done. They can't do anything in any case because, like I said, we're all too emotionally involved.
There'll also be that drop-off. I'm sure a lot of people might have upgraded memberships to get sort of guaranteed grand final tickets or better seats. They'll probably might downgrade, who knows. But it's going to have a roll-on effect next year. Based on our performance, we're going to get we'll get that easier draw playing the bottom six teams twice, but we're also going to get a bad draw in terms of when we play, how much TV, free-to-air TV we get. So we'll probably might get one Friday night game, maybe a Thursday night, but it's going to be not like, this year, what did we have? We had 2 Friday nights and a Thursday night. I definitely won't get that. That's all going to have a follow-on effect. And also, I think our sponsorship with Jaguar was only for 1 year, and I'd be very surprised if they re-up that based on our performance, and also not getting the TV next year, most likely. Yeah,
that's the really critical factor. These are the flow-ons. The membership, the dollars that comes from the membership. I think we heard Gary Pert say that those extra members this year provided another $1 million in the bank, but losing the free-to-air coverage, the Friday night games, the Saturday games, and the sponsorship arrangements, I think will come up to more than $1 million when it all pans out, which is exactly what we don't need at the moment. So you can only hope that the easier draw that would be expected, I suppose, for next year produces some early results and early wins, which gives the confidence for the people to come back.
Yeah,
you can't understate the financial impact of this year. I mean, in some respects, for all Melbourne fans, it was sort of not even bittersweet, it was sad, really. The sort of pump up for the last 3 games at the G. This was the triumphant against the Swans, wasn't it? The Tigers, Collingwood, Swans games, when the marketing people at the club were planning their pre-season sort of strategy. They would have been banking on 3 games at the G, maybe 70,000, 80,000 people. For each, maybe not, 60 or 70,000 for each of those 3 games. Maybe not the Swans games.
Well, the Swans do get supporters there, and had we been playing well, and we can't affect how they're playing, but had they based on last year, they're making the finals. Had they had a good year and we had a good year, you would get close to 60,000, if not more. Plus it was a Friday night, so it would have been a showcase game. But considering
massive.
Considering we didn't have Anzac Day and Queen's Birthday this year, they would have been looking at those three games as big money winners, and it didn't pan out. And the weather didn't help us either for those games.
The two of those three games, the weather didn't pan out well, and funnily enough, one of them, the weather did pan out, but it was supposed to be Arctic, rain, and never came. Yeah, it did. It came
too late
in a way in the end. Yeah, too late. Well, yeah, that's right. So, I mean, I feel for Pertz. He's just had a horror, hasn't he? So, and I've got no, the criticism of Pertz, I don't really understand in the sense of.
Yeah, I don't get that.
I mean, I don't have the metrics.
But I don't get the people have gone very early with their criticism of him. I don't. You can't blame him for anything that's happened on the field this year.
No.
It seems like people are, and all right, we'll see what happens in the next few years. But I think it's way too early to pin any blame onto him.
Yeah, people love to find someone to blame, don't they? But I think speaking from a board perspective and a CEO perspective, this is the type of year where you really learn whether both the board and the CEO are any good at their job. It's very easy, and it's to a certain extent when you're in the winner's circle and there's lots of backslappers around and the money's rolling in the door. It's when the money's dried up and things are going really bad, you find out about how good they are at managing that type of situation. So we'll find out, I suspect, only a little bit when the AGM's held this year. But the real test will be next year when you've got to deal with whatever was served up by the AFL in terms of draw fixture, and when we get a little way into the season, whether the results on the board are going to improve things or not. That'll be the real test of a CEO and a board as well.
Did I hear?
Yeah, and that goes to my point. Sorry, Andy. That goes to my point about the positives, because 5 or maybe 10 years ago, there would have been leaking from the club. There would have been crisis talks. There would have been sort of impassioned comments from the president in the press, and emails to members, just like Port Adelaide did and got slammed for a few weeks ago. There's been none of that, and impressively for Melbourne, because Melbourne in the whole time I've barracked for us, we've been woeful at the leaks from our club have been woeful, and there's not been a peep.
No.
This year, and that's when exactly as you say, George. That's when you sort of know when things under the pump is when the cracks appear. And for the first time in the whole time I've barracked for Melbourne, 45 odd years of barracking for the D's, we seem to be strong at the board level. Now you can only go on what you see, but that to me is a real positive.
Did I hear right that there's going to be a members forum, an open members forum to discuss this year, separate, I imagine, to the AGM? Sort of like one of those town hall type things.
That was mentioned, I think, in Pert's interview with SEN about a week or 10 days ago. I think that was part of that. So that'd be an interesting event. We can send a few people along from Demonland to ask questions, couldn't we? A few names come to mind, and see what happens.
It'll be
maybe some.
Go ahead.
Maybe some representative from the factions, from Penny Collective could be there, and the wrist slashes, and could also be there. There could be a number of factions there.
That'll be interesting. It'll also be interesting to see if the club might broadcast that on their social media. I don't know if it's a closed session or not, but that'll be interesting, that one. So
it's a very risky proposition, though, isn't it?
There'll be a lot of angry people there. I guarantee.
That's unfortunate that when you get to that sort of scenario, the angry people get plenty of floor time, and you actually don't get to hear what you need to hear about what is going on in the background of the club. Because even though while we're all passionate supporters, particularly on this website, we still really don't know, and we hope for little pieces of information from here or there, but we don't know what's going on in the background with the players and the coaches. And as Bidman said, that's been a really good thing from Melbourne compared to previous years. We're just getting on with the business without giving and feeding the media pack something to write about every day of the week, or which is what they have done so in the past. The media will disappear after a day or two, as we've found, and they'll move on to something else because there is always something else. But Melbourne, despite an absolutely appalling season, hasn't been back page news of the newspapers and on all the media outlets for this season. So that is a big positive.
That's
and on that point, the interesting thing is that the sort of comments by Caroline Wilson about us being, quote unquote, irrelevant. That's the reason. The reason is because we're not feeding the story. I mean, St Kilda, are equally unsupported as us in terms of numbers. North Melbourne the same. But when there's dramas, if the drama gets out, then the media feed on it, all the Tom Morrises of this world, and all, that whole industry of gossip that swirls around a club. If you feed you feed that, well, then suddenly they're relevant, but not in the right way. So I'm happy to be relevant in that landscape, to be honest, because, as I said, I remember 20 years ago, Joe Goodnick. Well, we weren't irrelevant then. Everyone was wanting to know about it because it was, filling up the gossip pages. So I'm happy for that. And on that point, the other thing is that there's been a bit of chatter in social media and Demonland about divisions and criticisms and fallouts between the captains and, all of that stuff. But, I think, come on, it's a footy club. There's 200 people involved. There's egos, they're driven young men. There's always going to be this stuff. There's always going to be stuff. It's like the Australian Test team. When they win, the stuff doesn't come out. When they start losing, all of the, everyone airs their dirty laundry. That's just the nature of 200 people together in a highly competitive arena.
There's a bit of talk whether, I think they're going to be conducting an internal review. Josh Marnie will be sort of reviewing the entire football department, but there's been calls on Demonland, I know for sure, of people wanting a external review and sort of all sort of positions around the club to be put under the microscope. George, I'll ask you, what are your thoughts on that? You happy with just an internal review, or you think it should be?
I think every single football club, no matter what their position on the ladder, will have a review of some sort of their operations at the end of this season. If any club doesn't do that, I think they've got serious problems. Maybe Fremantle isn't doing a review. They've already made their decisions. Internal or external, I can only go on my own experience of these type of situations. The difficulty with external reviews is that you spend most of your time providing information to the external reviewers about things that you already know. The external reviewers, with few exceptions, spend an awful lot of time, an awful lot of money to tell you something that you probably already know. However, in scenarios where an organisation becomes almost dysfunctional, then an external review is required because you need to get a completely different perspective on what is needed within the organisation to make it become functional again. So not fussed, because once again, we as outsiders effectively don't know the internal machinations of the club. But as things stand at the moment, an internal review, I'd imagine, would be sufficient. I can't think of any examples where external reviews, apart from AFL external reviews, have produced anything of value. I'd like to hear of any examples of that, if that's the case.
Bin Man?
Look, I concur 100%. I mean, when do you have an external review of any organisation? You have an external review when you're in crisis. You don't have one when you're not in crisis. So it all depends on where you sit on are we in crisis or not. And my perspective is we're not. Yes, with the 5 wins is terrible. I mean, my point is, I've been fairly consistent all season about the causes of that, which is not to say that there aren't other issues which a review will pick up. But Jennings going, McCartney going, a new thing over them, it's not as if they're sitting on their hands already. So, I think that 2 things is, one, exactly as George says, is that in crisis, when there's dysfunction, then you need an external review because that's the mechanism. And that goes for any organisation. But when you're not in crisis, you don't. And I think it's really dangerous. Why would they go to an external review? Because that's actually saying to everyone, all the stakeholders, that we are in crisis, which sends completely the wrong message and an inaccurate message. It's like inviting crisis into your club. So I just don't understand the calls for it, to be honest. And it's not as if they won't get external experts. I mean, it's not as if they won't get good expertise and good thinking into that process. But to get an external, I just don't understand the logic of it. And besides which, what's external? I mean, how do you define external? How do you get anyone in the football club that's not got some sort of, how do you get an objective person coming in to review a footy club, for God's sake? They're so emotional as a sort of institution.
Yeah, I agree. Watch this space. Jordan Lewis hanging up the boots, plays last game for the D's. I think he's only, he played about 53 odd games for the D's. I was happy that we were able to get him to bring in a bit of experience into the team, some on-field coaching. On the whole, I think it's been a success. He was playing out his career, so we weren't expecting the Jordan Lewis of the 4 premierships, but I think he's done a pretty good job at the D's, and you can't buy that type of experience.
It's interesting, isn't it? There were lots of naysayers at the start, but I think that Jordan Lewis has been almost a replica of what Daniel Cross was before.
Yep.
That they just had that sort of player with that sort of experience just adds that stability that we have needed and really needed, given our position from 6 years ago when both of those players, or over the period when both of those players have been around. I think the big question for us is, do we need another Daniel Cross or another Jordan Lewis for next year, and who would be our preferred option? I think we've all seen what Hodge has done up in Brisbane in a similar sort of situation. Is there a need again for that sort of player for us, and who would it be?
Interesting.
It's a good question in terms of, personally, it's funny because I called earlier on in the season and talking with Greg Finding in Southend about Lewis, and the sort of discussion was, well, he'll play out to the bye and then he'll gracefully retire, and that was certainly my perspective.
And I'll just interrupt. I think he would have had we not been decimated with injuries. I think they brought him back as a need at the time because we don't have any other players.
Yeah, and I have to say he's been really important in the second half of the season. And he's been tried up forward in different roles, and his experience has been at least one factor. And I've really enjoyed him. Enjoyed's probably the wrong word, but I've been pleased that he's been in the team, because we've had players that haven't had leadership, and I think it's a really interesting question. I personally wouldn't have thought we'd needed that. I think that I'm starting to think that we do need that sort of leadership, and partly because perhaps, maybe that sort of incident that I talked about of Jones not coming across on that mark, it's a small thing, but that's when your leaders need to stand up, and he would have done that. He's limited. He would have come across. His body language never dropped. He gets annoyed at other players, but his effort sort of doesn't drop. His ability to execute did. Lewis, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
who that would be, I don't know in the current landscape, but I feel like we do need that sort of Cross or Hodge or Lewis to come into the club, particularly next year, because that's something we're going to miss when he goes, because he would have been talking to the young fellas saying, stay the course. This happens. Football clubs go up and down. He had his own experience of when they dropped out of the finals after winning a flag. So I suppose it's not quite, but you know what I mean? That he would have had some experience to pass on to the younger players. And by all accounts, he was terrific when he went back to Casey. So I think it's well worth considering who that would be. Who it would be, I'm not sure.
I'd love him to stick around in a coaching role. I don't think that'll happen. I think he's going to go into the media. So I don't think we'll see Jordan Lewis as a coach. I bet you they've asked the question of him, and hopefully maybe he can convince his mate Roughhead to get down to the club as a forward coach. But I don't think we'll see Jordan Lewis. I think he'll go straight into the media.
I think so too, and if for no other reason, then he will step straight into it and he'll make a motto, won't he? Yeah. So I don't know what they get paid to be an assistant coach, but it won't be anything like you get paid for. He'll step it straight into a media role. He's intelligent. He speaks well. He's got a good grasp of the game. So
and he's already there. So it's just continue business as usual.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? The again on Demonland, as soon as someone retires, the question comes out: should we pick them up as an assistant coach or something like that? I think a lot of people forget that a player is different to a coach.
That's true.
In the case of Jordan Lewis, I think he's got both those attributes. He's an excellent player and reader and knowledgeable about the game, but I think he's also a great teacher of the game, that he's able to, which is what a coach needs to be able to do. You don't need to be a great player to be a great coach. I think someone like Alistair Clarkson's a good example of that. But you do need to be able to teach players and get your message across to them. Just because someone was great, like Roughhead, I don't know whether Roughhead's a great teacher or not, but just because he's a great player doesn't mean he automatically should be top of your list for to put him in there as a coach.
No, and I mean the thing about Lewis that I think why my sense is that he might be someone who'd suited coaching is like Clarkson. He's got a fierce sense of not just competitiveness, but you get the sense that he's got his own thinking and he's not going to be swayed. And which I found it quite funny, the sort of criticisms, a suggestion on Demonland a few weeks ago about Goodwin being a control freak, thinking like, well, that's just an AFL player. A coach needs a pretty big ego and needs to be confident in their ability to control every aspect of a club, basically. And you'd suspect that Lewis would have that sort of mindset, and certainly Clarkson does. And I mean, it's quite remarkable if you look at the sort of success of people involved with Clarkson in the last 4 or 5 years. It's just incredible, really.
Yeah, he's got a good strike rate with coaches that have, with the exception of Bolton was with him, I think. But, he does certainly success sort of follows people that coach under him.
Yeah, and that's all about the systems that they introduce, isn't it? And the techniques and the policies that they implement at the club, and the expectations that they place on the new arrivals and the new players from a very early stage. It's about getting everything right in the first place, and hopefully we've got a control freak as well as a coach, because I would, as Binman just said, I would think that most AFL coaches are. So.
Well, you have to be. The boss has to. The buck stops with him. Yeah. Just looking, we'll discuss the injury list, and you're right. I hadn't seen the updated one. It's quite a list. But Oscar McDonald is actually on this list on the AFL site.
He's maybe the AFL's reading Demonland.
Yeah, possibly, because Petty and Oscar are on there, but they're both listed as TBC. Right. So I think the TBC is just a catch-all for we have no idea what's going on, but you may as well list them as test.
And what does that mean with 1 round to go?
Yes, so this is.
And what does it mean for Demons anyway? The way we've communicated about injuries this year, TBC could be taking care of business or anything. It's like It doesn't necessarily mean to be confirmed. It's been appalling in the communication about injuries this year, and so who knows? I mean, he came out with an ankle injury, and there's been no mention at all, Petty, for that. How did they get injured? What was the injury? Did they train during the week? It's just been, really, I think that's something I can criticise Pert for, I think, is the communication from the club has been poor all season.
Well, I've noticed you've said that quite a lot. You've been quite critical of the club in terms of their communication, and particularly with injuries. What's the line? You want the communication with the members, but what about the not showing your hand to other clubs? Where's the line that you sort of draw there, Bin Man?
Well, I mean, I just think that's to be honest, the key stakeholder, one is the key stakeholders, the members, is us, is the paying members. And then there's the general fans. But the second thing is in the bubble that is the AFL, as if no one doesn't know what's going on. Mm. I mean, anyone involved in the industry knows if Oscar McDonald, well, they probably aren't so fussed if he's injured, but, if there's any risk that Franklin's not going to be playing, every single person in the AFL knows that before any, Joe Blow public knows that. So I think that's a complete furphy as... no one's holding their cards to their chest, maybe in a few times, but 20 years ago, maybe, but not these days. So I think what I find interesting is, I talked about this previously, but is the sort of the way we're slavishly following American sports in some respects. The AFL certainly does. And I follow NBA a little bit in the States, and their reporting on injury is like everything's transparent. And for good reason. There's a whole range of reasons that, betting not least of them. But I just think it's disrespectful to your key stakeholders, us, not to know what's going on. I mean, what's up with Petty? I want to know whether he's going to play or not. There was someone on Demonland who booked their tickets to go to Tasmania weeks ago, and maybe they want to cancel if Petty's not playing, or we don't have a reasonable chance because they've not selected their best players. So, I just think that it's beholden on the clubs to give the right information. And to be honest, the AFL shouldn't compel it.
You're absolutely right, Andy. It becomes a very difficult situation that the club puts itself in. Do you come out after round 3 or 4 and say, actually half of our list is still got some sort of injury, and we don't anticipate winning any more games for the season. If you're totally honest with the club, as it might have been in this situation, as we might have been in exactly that situation this year. The other difficult thing about injuries is, unfortunately, the AFL has opened up the Pandora's box of betting on football games, and who you put on an injury list or not on an injury list affects the betting. So it's a very difficult situation for the club, and it's difficult for the club to operate probably within some sort of AFL guidelines as well, because I dare say that there are a lot of players who aren't on our injury list at the moment who actually are injured and are playing, but we're never going to find out about it, or we suspect it as supporters looking on the outside. We wonder why Tom McDonald can't run properly. We wonder why Jack Viney is going up and down in one spot. It's because they're all carrying injuries and have done for considerable parts of the season.
And so on that, George, that the way I would do it is that, how I would think would be fair is that's fine. You don't have to report injuries that don't mean a player misses a game. And you can trust your own judgment. I mean, from my perspective, it's evident that Tom McDonald was carrying an injury, particularly in the first half of the season. You could see it. He could barely kick over 40 metres, and that's a fellow who could easily clear 50. That's fine if they select them. It's the choice not to select them because of an injury, I think, that's the issue. I mean, I guess the other the wrinkle in the onion to an extent is the other sort of thing that's come in the last 10 years, which is drug tests and mental health, like legitimate mental health issues and drug and alcohol issues where players are arrested because of those, or not played because of those issues. So I think that's probably in there, in the mix actually, in terms of reporting and non-reporting. Who knows whether that's the case at Melbourne, but you know, probably a lot of players are in that mix. We've had a number of players who have put their hand up this year for those things. So if that's in there, but I think if a player can't play, like Oscar McDonald, like Petty, is the fans should be able to know that that's the case, and it should be clear why they couldn't play.
So, given look, we don't know whether Oscar or Petty are going to play. Assuming they don't, who plays on Ben Brown this week? I guess Frosty is the only last man standing in terms of big defenders.
Maxi?
Well, I don't think Maxi's going to play. Is Maxi on the injury list? I can't see his name there.
No,
Didn't he sit on the bench for quite a bit of the game towards the end? What's the story with his hamstring?
I think I saw Goodwin say a couple of days ago they anticipate that he'll be okay for this weekend. It was probably a good move, resting him on the bench for a considerable amount of time. But the advantage we've got this week is that Casey have a bye, so all of those players who weren't there last week would be available to play for us this week, including Bruce. So
maybe they should do what when Casey played and the Melbourne team play on the previous day, all the fellas go to the Casey game, or the senior players. Maybe they should do that in the reverse, and the whole club should go down to Tasmania and stand in the outer and create some confusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so look, I guess it's going to fall to Frosty. We didn't speak about this. Frosty moving into the forward line. What were your thoughts on that? Was that just trying something new?
I think going back, he played some games for forward when he first came to the club. Yeah. I thought it was classic. I mean, to be honest, it's been quite remarkable how Frost has become the pin-up boy this season, but he showed exactly his sort of weaknesses on Friday. I mean, some of his turnovers were just horrific. And so if he doesn't have a positive impact, his turnovers are always going to be there. And his one bit of play was brilliant. He came out, took a mark on the lead, and he thought, well, that's a rare thing to see a mark in our forward line. And then he, of course, sprayed his shot at goal.
Look, it was something that was worth a try. You know, maybe we've found a second Tom McDonald. You know, but for next season. But what was interesting, it was a very strong mark that he came out. But it was also probably the first time in that game that we actually kicked to the top of the square instead of to the pockets or somewhere out on the wings. So it was good to see a leading forward being given the opportunity, even if he didn't kick the goal subsequently.
And he hit that ball with pace. That was the thing that was lacked this season. He really hit that ball, he hit the ball at pace, and we've just had no. You know, Wiedemann's been disappointing. Tom McDonald, as we spoke about, and that was my thought as well. I thought, geez, that's how forwards go. And I watched Lynch mark in the wet on against West Coast and thought that's just fantastic. That's what we've struggled with all season. Just that player who can grab that ball out of the air, but it hit the contest at pace, and even if they miss it, it spills in front of them, and you know it's predictable what happens. Should be predictable what happens after that.
I'm very worried about the scoreline this week. I think we might get a hiding.
No, it won't happen. Remember, Andy, it's been played in Hobart.
Is that the windy one?
There's a good chance of an Antarctic burst, and I think if any team can kick 3 or 4 goals, that might be a winning score.
What's the temperature for Hobart on the weekend?
I don't know, but it'll probably be cold.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And windy.
Is this the ground that has that wind advantage to one end? I can't remember which ground in Tasmania has that.
I can't say positively about that. if it was
All
like the
I know
last
is
time
we
we
don't
played
win in
down there,
Tasmania.
the answer would be yes, of course.
Big man, what was that? We don't win in Tasmania. That's for sure.
The whole state's a write-off for us. It's well, that game was at Bloodstone. I can't remember either. 3 years ago, was it where Gawn had that free kick and the boundary line ripped off him or paid against him, or So my memories of Tasmania aren't great. I'm still thinking of tipping us because I need to claw back that tip somehow.
Don't do it in the Melbourne game, that's for sure.
No, this is the week to tip Freo.
Yeah, the coach, the coach sackings have a good record. It's 13 degrees on Saturday, 13 and raining. 13 in showers, low of 4 degrees. So, should be cold for anyone going over to Tassie this week.
Yeah,
and
I don't think
one of the biggest myths in football, I think, is that the wet weather levels teams up, and I think the exact opposite is true.
Well, for us,
it exacerbates skill issues, and so the rain's not going to help our quality.
No. That's for sure. Anything else, boys, before we wrap things up? Anything I've missed on the boards this week?
I think I saw in the injury report that Wiedemann's gone in for his second hip operation this week, and they anticipate that he will be available for full training as of early December. So that's good. Some good news. But again, talking about the injury situation, I didn't know that he had a hip problem. Now we find out he's got two.
Well, I didn't know. No, there was a poster mid-year. Someone obviously had some inside info. He said and that was from a source from the family. It was posted earlier in the year, and so that was known, not to the wider community, but someone on Demonland did have the mail for that. Keep an eye on that poster because it's got good mail.
Yes.
Well, he mentioned that they were considering putting him in for surgery during the mid-season, and they elected not to. And it makes me wonder whether he strikes me as a real confidence player. I guess everyone is to an extent, but he of all, in particular, seems like a player who needs to be up and about and confident. And I wonder whether he's had that all season, and it's really hurt his form, but then that's flowed on to his confidence. And we need him to be the player that we all hope that he is going to be or could be, because he's pretty critical with Hogan going and structurally and for a whole range of reasons. So hopefully that all goes well with his surgery and he does get back and he's put in a full pre-season and he's ready to go next season.
Yeah, I'd have to agree totally with that, Binman, because we've got everything invested in T-Mac and Wiedemann. After losing Hogan, we really haven't replaced anyone for Hogan. So if Wiedemann doesn't come up next year, we're going to be in desperate situation yet again, with everything depending on Tommy Mack.
And the issue with that is that I've been banging on about this for years, but we desperately need a player like Jack Martin or that sort of style player who's an outside run with really good kicking skills, and so we can't afford really to lump our eggs in getting another kick forward, because we just simply have to get 2 or 3 of those outside players. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter how good our forward line is or isn't. If you're not getting good kicks in there, you simply aren't going to score, which is, I think we've missed that. We've missed Melksham hugely this year with their inside 50, and I think we've missed Jack Watts, to be honest, for the same reason.
Well, that Jack Watts one's that ship's sailed long ago. What about your thoughts? We may as well, while we're here and you're here, Bim Man. Looks like we're in the box seat for Ed Langdon. Thoughts on that one, and what we're going to have to give up for that too.
Personally, it's. Really, one of the things I do enjoy on Demonland is the off-season talk about players and the sort of machinations. And I don't really get it, to be honest. I just don't know players well enough from other clubs. And I get a player like Lewis and think he's the best kick in the league, and he comes to Melbourne and turns every third ball over. So, So, I mean, if he wants to come to the club and we do need that sort of player, that'd be great. My view is always I just watch the wash-up. It's more about the players we're going to lose is concerning. Although it doesn't look like we're going to lose any gun players this year, like Hogan last year. So I just hope we do get that sort of outside player in.
I think, Andy, that the critical thing has happened in the last 6 hours when Ross Lyon's been sacked as coach of Freo, and also they've lost their CEO. We've been associated with Ed Langdon supposedly coming to Melbourne, and also Brad Hill we've been mentioned in as well. And the difficulty that we now face and the possibilities is that any new incoming coach will want a complete review of their playing list and who they want to keep and who they don't want to lose. And I suspect that both Langdon and Hill will be well and truly at the top of the list for players that the new coach might want to keep, because otherwise they're sending a message to their supporters, everyone's walking out on Freo, like Lachie Neale did last year and like Charlie Cameron did last year, and now we're going to lose another 2 of them. So there's pressures on the Fremantle board and coaches and staff to retain players. So we might have been snookered at the very last moment, perhaps.
I think Charlie Cameron played for Adelaide.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Who was the one who went to Brisbane? Sorry.
Lachie Neale went to.
Lachie Neale.
Yeah. Who was the small? There was a small forward, I think, went there as well.
Was there Weller?
Was Rayner? Did he come from there?
Rayner was a number 1 draft pick, I think.
Yeah.
Brisbane got it,
but I think the message is still the same.
Yeah.
That we can't afford to lose quality players to other clubs.
Yeah.
We need to keep them here. So we'll wait and see.
So the history of that is that I think Kelly was an outlier last year. Is players want to leave in this current climate, they go basically. So it sounds as if both Langdon and Hill both want to leave back to Victoria. So it's a big call to keep a player, particularly in a state player, at a club when they don't want to play. So I can't see that happening. I take the point, and I think that's unless there's an issue that's going to help, and Lyon and Hill didn't get on, for instance, and that might change the dynamic. But my understanding from, I guess, mainly what I've read on Demonland is that Hill wants back in Victoria, his partner wants to come back, and Langdon wanted to come back last year and has made it clear he wants to come back. So I suspect we'll get Langdon. It concerns me that I've talk about his kicking's not great, but I to be honest, I just haven't seen enough of him play to make that judgment. But he's certainly an outside runner, and I think that's what we also need, is that player who can cover the ground. We've just got too many. I forget which poster on Demonland put it, but he talked about the sort of difference in pace. We just don't have that sort of runner who can run fast over a long distance. We've got burst players, but we need someone who can run 200 metres in a reasonable time to get to the contest or offer an outlet kick.
There was a thing today saying that Hill has ruled out Melbourne as a possibility, and also there's the price tag of $900,000, which is probably out of our price range. But the worrying thing is we're no longer, and I don't know if we ever were, a destination club, especially if we don't have the dollars to pay overs or to pay for some of these players. So that looks like it's the case with Hill.
Well, now that I know that, I never wanted him in the first place.
So it'll be interesting. Do you think there's a, and we'll probably still talk about this next week and through trade week, do you think there's a possibility that we'll give up pick 2 for a player, or we're going to go back to the draft with that pick? I'll start with you, Ben Man.
Well, I think there was a really interesting discussion about, I hadn't even thought about it until I read it on Demonland, is that it somewhat depends on the priority pick for Gold Coast, but we
pick 3.
We will get pick 2 now, but if it becomes pick 3, and even if it doesn't, if Ben King definitely wants out of that club, they've got a big call to make. And getting back to the discussion about, key forward, I guess, if he said, well, I want to get back to Victoria, if they traded him and their first draft pick, which, as I understand it, is they had they got Brisbane's pick, so it'll be, 16 or 17 or something, well, now 17. So if we got a first round draft pick and Van King for pick 3, I think they'd seriously look at it. I would have thought he looks a pretty good player, but again, then you're missing out on a chance of that outside player with skills and who, these days those top players come into the AFL system ready to play, don't they? So it's a big call to the club.
Yeah, we've been out of sort of those early round picks for a number of years, and you have a look at the NAB Rising Star stats. We haven't had a NAB Rising Star since Oscar McDonald, your favourite player, Big Man, since 2016, where we did have 4 players in that year, but we haven't had one since then. And I think Bailey Fritsch was too old when he first played to get that, and so I think there was another player as well that sort of missed out on it. But yeah, so it was a big call to make. But then again, that Ben King, if you can get him to his second-year player, still a young player as well, who could be quality for our forward line ruck stocks.
I think there's. I think it's almost essential from my perspective that we stick with the pick itself, simply because the real talent is available at the top end of the draft. Whether they're successful or not is yet to be seen. But you get your percentages of successful players are always at the top end of the draft. We haven't had that opportunity for the last couple of years because of where we finished or we've traded it out to try and get in people like Lever. The danger is if you leave yourself without the talent for too long, all of a sudden there's 3, 4, 5 years where you haven't injected talented players into the side, and then you wonder why you're stuck in that mid-table going nowhere sort of situation. So here's an opportunity to grab someone who potentially could be very good. It may, if all the rest of the talent in the side perform adequately over the next couple of years, it may be our last chance to actually grab someone while we can. So I'd be in favour of sticking with the pick. You then start to trade. Remember, our second pick is going to be pick 20 at the moment. So that's a very tradable pick if you wanted to work something in with that and a player. But I'm loath to go about in the draft and trading period. I'm loath to throw up all these scenarios which could arise, because you just go round and round in circles about what we could do, what we can't do, and what the other parties are willing to accept and things like that. It's too hard to try and work out. But while there's talent to be taken that's right there, effectively free of charge for you, then you should grab it, I think.
Well,
and I think that's an excellent point, because one of the things that Melbourne has lacked over the last 10 years is 1 or 2 A-grade players. Now, Oliver looks like he's going to be an A-grade player. Maybe arguably he is. Gorn is definitely an A-grade player. But realistically, that's it, isn't it, in terms of our A-grade player? We need another one. And you look at, Walsh is something completely out of the box for Carlton, but that's the sort of, he's automatically an A-grade player, and he's going to be one, barring injury. And we need another one. Like the teams that win flags have 2 or 3 A-grade players, have 6 or 7 B-grade players who are close and pushing for A-grade players, and then role players. So we desperately need that. And exactly as you say, George, if you don't, then you've got this big bubble. And if we do make finals next season, for instance, or even if we finish mid-table, we're not going to get the top 5 draft pick again for a while, with a bit of luck. So I think that's a really good point about that. And and also the excitement that it brings to pick up, to get a player in at the top of the draft.
Well, we've certainly had our chances in the last decade to grab those players, and we have failed miserably.
Well, we had Oliver, Brayshaw, Petrarca. I think we'll see the best of Petrarca still. So I think Fair abysmal is a bit of an
Yeah,
overstatement, I think.
Yeah, I think I think that's just my my pessimism coming through. But if you do love talking about the whole trade and the draft and making all these scenarios, head over to demonland.com. We've got the trade and draft, what to do with pick 2 board happening there. So get over there if you just love pie in the sky type of thinking. This is the best time of year for it.
Can we play this this period? We'll have good fun playing on Demonland, the bend over bingo. I'll be interested to see how many times we get accused, and Josh Mahoney in particular, of bending over and taking, the bad deal from Freo or Essendon, or it seems to be the most oft criticism of our club.
Well, and this is another watch this space because it's coming. When is trade week? Usually sometime in October, or is it? Yeah. So it's not far away.
Not far away. And I think there will be a big. There's no question they'll cut 6 or 7 players. So that's the other factor I was going to say earlier on, is that not only have we had a terrible year, and but a lot of those players had, know that this is their end of their career. But some of them, the end of their AFL career. So mates are leaving the club. Some of the assistant coaches will have been told they've left, and the players will have had relationships with those coaches. It's not going to be a great space at the moment at the footy club. So for them to come out and play with not much spirit is not really that, big a surprise in the context of what's happening for them.
Yep. Depressing stuff. All right.
Finishing on a great note, like we started.
Yes. Well, I think we'll wrap things up there. Thank you, boys. Thank you, B-Man, for coming on and joining us for the remainder of the show, like you did. Love hearing from you and love your insights. George, thank you very much for co-hosting with me tonight. And we'll be back next week for hopefully not to dissect a train wreck. Be nice, considering that we can't lose the position that we're in. We can't go up, we can't go down. Let's go out with a win and stop Ben Brown from kicking 10 goals. All right,
go D's.
Go D's. We'll be back next week. Let's go those Demons.
Thanks,
go Red Legs.
I've got this feeling